Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Artist Within. I am your host, Casey Bell, and today's artist guest is Mary Elizabeth Peterson. Let's get this show started. So, as an artist, when is the earliest memory do you have of you beginning to use your art skills?
I would say from a very early age that the world was very alive to me in a visual sense, more so than, um, any of the other five senses. I have a lot of early memories about light streaming in through windows and sweeping through certain spaces, and those memories are almost exclusively visual. There's no background sounds or scents or any of the other senses. They're almost exclusively visual, like my mind was just kind of a little camera recording it all. I don't know if I would have connected that as being like the origins of my art inclination, but I remember snippets like that going back to when I was a toddler.
Neat. So, when did you come to the conclusion that becoming an artist was definitely something you wanted and needed to do?
Great question. Well, like a lot of artists, it was not a straight path from A to B. My story is rather dramatic. I had early exposure to art. I was sort of signaled out in school as someone that had an ability in that area. So I was able to get into art lessons very early. But I had kind of a challenging childhood. I had learning disabilities. I had a lot of instability in my home life. And while I was always good at art and always, praised and recognized and really, given a lot of enrichment around the arts, I decided at college age that I wouldn't go into the arts, that it just seemed too scary, too unstable of an income stream for me. And I was just afraid of it. So I pursued a degree in journalism, as a matter of fact, and always kept, the art spirit within me alive. I ended up minoring in art history. I always visited museums. I always did creative things every day, whether I made little tablescape arrangements with objects that I would find. I always, paused to notice, leaves blowing on a pathway or whatever. That art spirit stayed alive during the journalistic training. And then into my career, I had a very successful career as a professional corporate writer. So I wrote marketing materials and speeches in the investment industry. And I was really successful with that at a very young age. And then something very dramatic happened. When I was 27 years old, I started experiencing some migraine headaches and went to the doctor for consultation, had some tests, and learned that I had a arterial ventricle malformation deep in my brain. So what it was essentially a birth defect of the artery on my left internal carotid inside my brain. And I was told that I needed surgery immediately, that it could rupture at any time just with me walking around. And if I didn't have surgery, I was probably going to fall victim of this thing bursting and either killing me or leaving me in a persistent vegetative state. So it was pretty tough news. Um, I was married at the time. My husband and my family were incredibly supportive, and I had to go in for 11 hours of brain surgery in Washington, D.C. And with brain surgery, they do a very interesting thing. They save the medical directives for the last 2 minutes before they wheel you into the operating room. So what those medical directives are essentially is you writing down what conditions you would put in place for your family to pull the plug and let you pass if you're not, if you can't recover. So it's really, you know, writing down like, if I can't do X, pull the plug. If I can't do Y, pull the plug. Without any thought or deliberation, I wrote down, if I cannot paint, pull the plug. And that was probably the most profound moment of my life. I lived through the surgery. I had to teach myself how to dress myself again, how to eat again, how to do many things. I had to do a lot of cognitive rehabilitation with my memory and other things. But as soon as I was able, I enrolled in art school. So I went to art school first part-time at the Corcoran College of Art and Design down in Washington, D.C. And that was really it. I knew at that point that life is very short and I needed to be doing the thing that I love the most. And I realized in that moment that I love to paint. So that was really it.
That is a very aspiring story.
Thank you.
It's like, hopefully it tells people you don't, even though you may be scared, you really need to go after who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. And so I thank you for sharing that. So once you decided to go to art school, when did you get to the point to where you quit the journalism job and you smoothly went into
Okay.
art?
So after I rehabilitated from the brain surgery, I had left the corporate environment and I was working as a consultant. And I had a graphic design partner in New York City. And so I sold my business to her and went back to art school then, more or less full time. And then unfortunately, I didn't get the timing down great, but I gave birth to twins 4 months after I graduated from art school. So my art career, if you will, got off to somewhat of a delayed start. But even when my children were very young, I tapped into and realized that I needed to be doing something creative every day. So twins are very labor intensive. That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Some days for me, it would be like I would have to set the table for dinner in a pretty creative, artistic way. I just need to be doing something creative every single day, or my soul is just not being fed. So that's the transition. It wasn't, like I said earlier, it wasn't a straight line. It took a while to get there. And when my kids were about 10 or 11, I was able to return to a daily art practice and made a studio in my home and began going to every opening, every museum show, just anything to just front load my mind, my heart, and my soul with what was going on in the art world and formulate the thoughts for the work that I was setting out to do.
Just so you know, I don't think anyone's success journey was a straight line. I believe everybody had zigzags and stops and bumps and things of that nature.
Yeah.
It's the only way to go, really, to be successful.
Yeah.
So when was it when your first art, what art piece was it, and when was it when your first art piece made it to a gallery or a show or a museum?
Okay, so the first time I showed in a museum was when I was about to graduate from the Corcoran. I had a wonderful mentor and a teacher there, and he did a student show. And that was incredibly exciting to be showing at the Corcoran Museum across the street from the White House. I didn't care that it was in, a back exhibit room. It was just tremendously exciting. So that happened in 2001. And then, went on pause there for a while. And I think it was about 2006 or 2007 that I became involved with the Silvermine Art Guild in New Canaan, Connecticut, which is one of the oldest artist guilds in America. I started sort of tapping into some classes there, took a class in collage. I thought that would be an interesting way for me with limited time because of my children, because of raising my children. I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of get my feet wet and be able to manipulate and work with color and shape and line quickly. And so I started doing some collage work and had some very good success with it, and showed pretty quickly after that at Silvermine in New Canaan. Also got into a couple of very good juried shows, one at the New Britain Museum of American Art. But gallery representation was really eluding me. That was really a challenge, really a challenge. And I thought at that point that gallery representation was the only pathway to success. And ultimately, I couldn't really make inroads into the galleries. So I was a very early adapter in the sense that I went to online galleries very, very quickly. So I got onto the Saatchi Art platform very early. At one point, I was selling work on there. I was probably in the top 10 in terms of sales of artists on that site. At that point, there weren't that many artists selling the work online. And then that whole platform really exploded. And there came to be, a number of other competing platforms for buying art, et cetera, to where we are today, where it's on one hand incredibly exciting, but on another hand, incredibly overwhelming. I mean, you can buy art right off your phone, in 5 minutes now. I mean, art has never been more prevalent, more accessible, more easy to access. It's really exciting, but there's a lot to sort through. There's a lot to weave through in terms of what you're looking at and what you want to collect if you're a collector.
So out of all the mediums and genres out there, I noticed that abstract art is your main focus. What drew you to that genre?
Oh, great question. So I had started painting in oils at age 9, very young. Later did a lot of work and a lot of study in watercolor. I was always a super photorealistic style painter. My training at the Corcoran College was extremely traditional. We used to joke around at the Corcoran that you couldn't get out of there until you could paint like John Singer Sargent, which if you've ever looked up close at his work, that's a tall order. So I had very, very traditional training. I enjoyed doing that kind of work. I enjoyed looking at the work of painters like the Wyeth family. I love anybody that paints with light. I mean, that sort of describes watercolorists to a T. But in art school, I began to kind of get bored with that. And I learned about abstract work earlier in my life when I was an art history major. And it really didn't resonate with me, but I had a couple of professors at the Corcoran who sort of took me aside and said, you know, there's a lot of possibilities that exist in abstract. And in many respects, it's like creating your own vocabulary of symbols, your own color coding, your own, it's kind of like creating your own universe. And when I started to think about it like that, it became extremely attractive to me. And that's kind of what I've been after in my work ever since. I'm always after this sort of elusive soft spot between something that reminds you of something that you may have seen in nature, but you can't quite pin it down. And I have an absolute love of color. I've always loved color. And that's the other really exciting aspect for me of being an abstract painter, that, you know, I'm not restricted to local color. You know, I can see a landscape in all sorts of colors, you know, and they're fully embodied and fully, you know, manifest with emotional meaning. And I absolutely love that.
So being that you started selling your work online in 2007 and you already knew how to do that, I'm going to make the assumption when the pandemic happened, it really didn't affect you negatively. Is that safe to say?
Well, you know, the pandemic, I think, has affected the art industry and the art world in a very dramatic way, and in ways I think that we don't even know yet. My sales did suffer. I had absolutely no trouble compensating because I do sell online. But I think right now, you know, what we're finding is that art is so accessible, and we're wondering, like, what is the role of the brick and mortar gallery? You know, what's the role of the art consultant in helping collectors select work or not select work? I think the whole industry is really changing, like in real time, and it's a little bit difficult to navigate. I have had a leg up because I do have a technical side, and I am so technically savvy. I established relationships with interior designers and art consultants several years ago. So I was in very good shape when the pandemic came. I still had a lot of people that enjoy my work and that have used my work in projects. So that didn't go away. That was good. But the taste for what art is right now and the ways of buying art are so varied. It's a little tough to navigate, but it's exciting. I think the whole art world's being really reinvented.
And a question kind of off the subject, a fun question, and this can be, I kind of call it a pretend question because the person you mentioned can be dead or alive, known or unknown. If there's an artist out there that inspired you that you would like to meet, sit down and have lunch with, talk to, ask why you made this art piece, what were you thinking when you did that? Who would the artist be and why?
Wow, it's so tough to narrow it down. Hmm. I think I'd probably have to go with Matisse. For me, I think that is someone that really changed the world's definition of what art is and what it can be. And I think it would be fascinating to talk to him. He's the first artist for me that I really connected with in terms of his emotionally charged use of color. You know, he doesn't use local color in his paintings. I think people don't recognize in his work just how technically able he is, because you can't really pull off what he pulled off without that foundational training, without that underpinning of amazing skills. I look at his work and I see an artist who's constantly challenging himself, constantly finding new ways of looking at things, shifting perspectives, and doing many things that no one in his era or his time was doing. And I just think it would be really incredible to talk to him and see if you could get a sense of, how his mind works, and, talk to him one artist to another about, I know I give myself frequent challenges. I'm curious to see if he was deliberate about that, or if he just took an overall approach to experimentation.
You're watching the artist. You're watching the artist within. That is all the time we have for you today on The Artist Within. I'd like to thank our guest, Mary Elizabeth Peterson, and of course you, the audience. Thank you so much for stopping on by and viewing. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great week.